ancient mythology of Middle-earth, was not originally a punishment. The creator Eru Ilúvatar bestowed upon mankind something called the gift of men, a privilege so that their souls would not be permanently bound to the fading and weariness of the physical world Arda. However, when the lust for power arose and the darkness of pride clouded reason, that gift became the ultimate fear. And it was from that profound fear of death that the most tragic and terrifying creatures in the history of Middle-earth were born. They were not mindless monsters. They were not demons born from the primordial fire. They were once great men. They are the nine Dark Riders, or in the Black speech they are called Nazgûl. This epic and dark story does not begin on blazing battlefields, but begins with deceitful words and irresistible mortal gifts. Deep within the Second Age, the Dark Lord Sauron, under the guise of a wise elven being named Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, deceived Celebrimbor and the most brilliant smiths of the elven realm of Eregion. Under his guidance, the rings of power were forged, but when Sauron's dark intentions were exposed, the flames of war burned Eregion to the ground in 1697. Sauron stole the 16 rings, 7 for the dwarves and 9 for men. Why did Sauron choose men to be granted the 9 most powerful rings among those 16? This was not a random choice, but the cruel psychological calculation of a master manipulator. The elves were too wise and already had their own rings. The dwarves, molded from mountain stone by the god Olé, were too stubborn and obstinate. Sauron's magic could not force them to obey, but only made them insatiably greedy for gold and silver. Only men, creatures with short lifespans, always yearning to leave a legacy, always yearning to reach the eternity of the elves, were the most perfect targets. The 9 rings were given to the 9 most outstanding mortal leaders, sorcerers and warriors. Among them, history only records the identity of a single one, Khamûl, a tyrant of the Easterling race from the distant land of Rhûn. But more importantly, 3 of these 9 were powerful lords of Númenor. They belonged to the King's Men faction, a faction in this great island kingdom that had begun to reject friendship with the elves and harbor resentment towards the Creator for not giving them immortality. When Sauron held out the rings, he didn't just give them power. He gave them exactly what they were maddeningly craving, the chance to defeat death. At first, the rings seemed to be miracles. Under their power, the 9 mortals became the greatest kings of the era. They amassed massive wealth. They defeated all enemies. They mastered spells to manipulate nature. Their lifespans extended endlessly, surpassing all human biological limits. They considered themselves living gods on earth. But the price to be paid is always hidden within the gifts of the devil. Sauron did not give them immortality. He only gave them permanent, endless existence. As Bilbo Baggins once described the feeling of holding the One Ring, they were like a small piece of butter spread over too large a slice of bread. The longer they lived, the more fragile their physical bodies became. Life lost its flavor. Food turned to ash in their mouths. Sunlight no longer brought warmth. The reason for this corruption lies in the core nature of the world Arda. Tolkien's universe exists in 2 parallel realities, the seen and the unseen. The seen is where humans, plants, and all things live. The unseen is the space of spirits, of the source of magic, where divine beings like the Valar or high elves, like Glorfindel, can exist radiantly. For the elves, connecting to the unseen world is a state of enlightenment and radiance. But for humans, it is a torment. The rings of power broke the laws of nature, forcing the physical bodies of the 9 kings to be torn and dragged into the unseen world. This process did not happen overnight. It was centuries of wasting away and panic. They began to see ghosts, spiritual entities that ordinary people could not see. Their physical vision faded, until everything in the real world was nothing but hazy, gray shadows. Then one day, their flesh and blood forms vanished completely. They did not die, but they also no longer existed in the world of the living. They had become wraiths, phantoms. Around the year 2251 of the Second Age, history recorded the official appearance of the Nazgûl. The unseen world was not a paradise, but their prison. There, they were stripped of all free will. Their minds were absolutely attuned to the One Ring resting on the hand of Lord Sauron. Sauron's heartbeat was their heartbeat. Sauron's will was the absolute command etched deep into the remnants of their souls. To interact again with the physical world, so the living could see them, the Nazgûl had to cloak themselves in black mantles and silver chainmail. Hidden beneath those empty hoods there were no faces, only the cold, glowing red light of two spectral eyes. Their most terrifying weapons were not swords or blades, but darkness and terror. Their presence in the seen world radiated an icy aura that could freeze the hearts of the bravest warriors. Their shriek was the howling of invisible death, a sound that tore at the soul and destroyed all hope. They served Sauron as his most terrifying generals, sowing terror throughout Middle-earth during the dark years of the Second Age, until the year 3441, when the last alliance of elves and men defeated Sauron, severing the finger wearing the One Ring. With the source of their power severed, the Nazgûl wraiths lost their direction. For the first time in thousands of years, they vanished into the deep night, sinking into an unnatural slumber without end. But as long as the One Ring had not been melted in the fires of Orodruin, the ghosts of the 9 mortal kings still could not find peace. When the last alliance defeated Sauron on the slopes of Mount Orodruin, many naively believed that peace would last forever. Over 1,000 years passed in the absence of the evil demon. The 9 Nazgûl wraiths sank into a deep slumber, silent as forgotten tombs. However, the primeval was not dead. It was merely biding its time. Around the year 1050 of the Third Age, a mysterious dark shadow began to envelop the beautiful greenwood, turning it into Mirkwood. The wise, the greatest wizards and elves of the age, were mistaken. They assumed it was merely one of the Nazgûl trying to rebuild the remnants. In reality, it was Sauron himself, in the guise of the necromancer. And when the dark heartbeat of the master resonated from the fortress of Dol Guldur, his most loyal servants also awakened. This is when we witnessed the true danger of the Nazgûl. They were not just terrifying assassins in the dark night. They were master military strategists, masters of psychological warfare. Instead of gathering their entire force for a frontal assault, the Nazgûl split up to operate. The greatest, most brutal masterpiece in their history of independent operations was the creation of the Witch realm of Angmar in 1300, molded by the hands of their leader, the Witch-king. Why did the Witch-king choose the freezing northern mountains to establish a kingdom? This was an incredibly sinister geopolitical move. At that time, the great northern kingdom of men, Arnor, was mired in crisis. Greed and jealousy had fractured Arnor into 3 bickering principalities, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudor. The Witch-king did not need to swing a sword to slaughter immediately. He used spies, sowed suspicion, and bribed corrupted men in Rudor, turning them into allies. He allied with the orcs, the trolls in the Misty Mountains, and those who worshipped the darkness. The war that Angmar launched against Arnor was not a lightning-fast conflict. It was a bloody war of attrition, lasting nearly 700 years. The Witch-king was patient enough to watch generations of men be born and die in despair, until the last northern kingdom, Arthedain, completely collapsed in 1974. Although a year later, the elves and the army of South Gondor marched up to defeat Angmar's army, Sauron's strategic goal was complete. The great northern kingdom of men had been wiped off the map of Middle-earth forever. The descendants of the king had to become wandering rangers, hiding in the shadows, one of whom, thousands of years later, was Aragorn. While Arnor was dying in the north, the southern kingdom of Gondor was not at peace either. The Great Plague swept through, claiming the lives of tens of thousands. The fortresses guarding Mordor were left abandoned. Gondor's weakness opened a fatal gap, and the Nazgûl immediately slithered through that gap like venomous snakes to return to their old realm, Mordor. In the year 2000 of the Third Age, the Nazgûl executed one of their most devastatingly iconic strikes. The 9 Dark Riders converged, surrounded, and attacked the fortress of Minas Ithil, Tower of the Moon, the proud border jewel of Gondor. After a suffocating 2-year siege, the fortress fell. The Nazgûl seized the city, defiling its magnificent architecture with twisted dark magic. The city emitted a sickly green light, cold as the light of rotting corpses. From then on, it bore a new name that sowed terror for all subsequent generations: Minas Morgul, Tower of Dark Sorcery. By capturing Minas Ithil, the Witch King not only plunged a dagger into Gondor's throat, but also captured an invaluable Palantir seeing stone, creating a massive intelligence advantage for Sauron. But military victory was never enough for the Witch King's cruelty. He wanted to crush the spirit of men. He targeted humanity's most core weakness: pride. In 2043, King Eärnur ascended to rule Gondor. Eärnur was an exceptional warrior who had previously led an army to the north to defeat the forces of Angmar. But in that past battle, Eärnur's horse, utterly terrified by the Witch King's aura of death, panicked and fled, causing the king to suffer a bitter humiliation right in front of the enemy. The Witch King never forgot that. As soon as Eärnur took the throne, the Witch King sent a letter challenging him to single combat. He dragged up the past humiliation to mock him. Despite the desperate dissuasion of Steward Mardil, touchiness and toxic ego clouded the Gondorian king's reason. Eärnur, bringing along a small cavalry escort, proudly rode his horse across the White Bridge and entered the death gates of Minas Morgul to reclaim his honor. Not a single one of them returned. Never. The death, or cruel torture, of Eärnur officially ended the bloodline of the kings of Gondor for the next millennium. Gondor was left under the rule of the ruling stewards. With a brilliant stroke of psychological warfare, the Witch King had decapitated the greatest commanding head of mankind, leaving Gondor to sink into confusion, fear, and the wait for its own demise. The following nearly 1,000 years were a period called the Watchful Peace. The Nazgûl hid themselves in the Morgul Vale, quietly forging weapons, breeding orcs, and waiting. Khamûl, the second most powerful Nazgûl, was dispatched to govern the fortress of Dol Guldur, acting as a pincer gripping the north tight. Until the year 2951, Sauron officially discarded all disguises, declaring his presence in Mordor and proceeding to rebuild the Dark Tower of Barad-dûr. The flames of war blazed once again. But Sauron knew all great legions, all bloodthirsty monsters would become meaningless if he did not find his precious object. Through torturing the wretched creature Gollum, Sauron extracted 2 fateful keywords: Shire and Baggins. But ordinary spies, stupid orcs, or treacherous men from the south lacked the capability to track down this mysterious target. They were constantly intercepted by the Northern Rangers or secretly sabotaged by Saruman the traitor. The time had come. The prime evil realized that this supremely important mission could only be assigned to his absolutely loyal servants, those who could not be bought, possessed no free will, and only knew how to obey unto death. In the year 3018 of the Third Age, the gates of Minas Morgul swung wide open. The 9 Dark Riders cloaked themselves in ragged robes, mounting black steeds and charging into the night. The greatest hunt, the pursuit that would determine the fate of all Middle-earth, officially began. The return of the 9 Dark Riders was not a noisy march. Sauron, with his suspicious and cunning nature, understood that if he unleashed his strongest forces, the wise would immediately sniff out his true purpose. Therefore, in June 3018, Sauron launched a brilliant diversionary tactic, a large-scale attack on the plains of Osgiliath. Amidst the rubble and blinding smoke of the battlefield, the presence of the Nazgûl was merely seen as part of a routine siege of Gondor. No one knew that, under that guise, the Witch King and his cohorts had secretly crossed the river Anduin, invisible in their core unseen forms, beginning their journey up to the north. Once resupplied with black cloaks and black steeds, the breathless pursuit officially began. The months-long search for the Shire demonstrated the terrifying patience of the demons. They did not hesitate to interrogate the traitor Saruman, or exploit the cowardice of Grima Wormtongue to find the exact location of the most peaceful land in Middle-earth. When the dark shadows glided across the borders of Hobbiton, the air seemed to solidify. Unlike tangible monsters that use muscular strength to destroy, the ultimate power of the Nazgûl is time's terror. During the part where they scoured the Prancing Pony Inn in the village of Bree, many often mistakenly believe, due to the influence of the film adaptations, that the Nazgûl themselves stormed in and slashed the beds to pieces. But in reality, according to the original work, Aragorn analyzed it very clearly. The Nazgûl always fear light and crowded places when they are not truly backed into a corner. They utilized minions, corrupted men like Bill Ferny, to dirty their hands for them. Their cruelty lies in their ability to manipulate fear, suffocating the minds of their enemies from within the shadows. However, the confrontation on the summit of Weathertop, Amon Sul, truly exposed the nature of their dark magic. When the Witch-king stabbed the Morgul blade into Frodo's shoulder, it was not a missed thrust intended to take his life. On the contrary, it was a deliberate, ritualistic attack. The Morgul blade was imbued with a dark magic capable of slowly dragging the victim from the seen world into the unseen world. The Witch-king retreated afterward, not entirely out of fear of Aragorn's torch, but because he arrogantly believed that everything was over. Once the shard of the blade reached his heart, Frodo would permanently become a minion, Wraith, handing over the ring to them with his own hands. However, that scheme was halted at the ford of Bruinen. The intervention of the elf lord Glorfindel, a high elf bearing within him the primordial light of Valinor, a detail the film version, replaced with Arwen, along with Elrond's water-summoning magic washed away. Their physical forms and their black steeds, failing miserably, with no horses and no cloaks, they were forced to drag themselves back to Mordor in feeble invisibility to face Sauron's punishment. But the prime evil did not give up. When the fiercest defensive war of the Third Age broke out, Sauron upgraded his servants. No longer wandering riders on the ground, the 9 wraiths now rode upon the backs of giant winged monsters, fell beasts, soaring in the sky like heralds of the apocalypse. The Witch-king's peak of power was displayed during the siege of Minas Tirith. He was not just a warrior, but a psychological spear piercing through the defenses of men. He used the Black Breath, a form of soul toxin that paralyzed the will, making the defending soldiers drop their weapons in despair. When the battering ram Grond shattered the great gate of Minas Tirith, it was the Witch-king himself who loomed inward, overpowering all sounds with a suffocating aura of death. The history of Gondor seemed to have ended beneath his heel. But fate always has arrangements of profound irony. Thousands of years prior, after the battle that brought down Angmar, the elf Glorfindel had made a prophecy. His doom is far off, and no man will bring him down. Arrogance caused the Witch-king to misinterpret this prophecy, believing himself to be completely immortal on the battlefield. He could not have expected that his end would come from the combination of the two beings he despised the most. On the Pelennor fields, as the Witch-king prepared to finish off the female warrior Éowyn, the woman who disguised herself for battle, a blade stealthily stabbed into the back of his knee. It was Merry, a small hobbit. The extraordinary thing lay in the fact that Merry's sword was not a nameless weapon. It was a barrow blade, forged by the smiths of the Arnor kingdom thousands of years ago, imbued with specific spells to destroy the very magic of Angmar. Merry's thrust shattered the Witch-king's spiritual protection, dragging him back to a vulnerable physical reality. And in that moment, Éowyn, not a man, swung the final sword, delivering a fatal blow to the empty crown, finishing off the most cruel entity of the unseen realm. The Witch-king vanished into a blood-curdling shriek, flying with the wind into nothingness. The death of the Witch-king was the beginning of the end. A few days later, at the Battle of the Black Gate, the remaining 8 riders soared in the air, desperately confronting the flock of giant eagles. But their battle was interrupted by a shockwave from afar. At the cracks of Mount Doom, Frodo Baggins had slipped the ring onto his hand. Sauron panicked. He realized he had been deceived. The flaming eye of Barad-dûr immediately shot towards Orodruin, and the 8 wraiths abandoned all targets, flying at a wind-tearing speed, darting towards the volcano. But it was all too late. Gollum slipped and fell. The One Ring sank into the sea of magma. The greatest magical bond was severed. The volcano erupted, a firestorm swallowing the 8 charging riders. They were incinerated, leaving no trace. The fortress of Minas Morgul was later abandoned. No one dared to come near because the gloom had seeped into every brick. And so, after more than 4,000 years of a lingering existence, the great kings of men, those who had rejected the gift of death in exchange for eternal existence, finally had to face their inevitable end. The journey of the Nazgûl is a chilling elegy about human greed and weakness in the face of the fear of death. They began with the desire to live forever, but in the end, the only thing they brought to themselves and to the world was just a long, drawn-out shadow of death.